From the Norman Conquest in 1066 to the reign of Elizabeth I in 1603, English monarchs left an indelible mark on history. But behind their golden crowns and the luxuries of the royal court led tragedies, betrayals, and power struggles that defined not only the fate of a nation, but the course of all of Europe. Prepare to delve into dynamic and fascinating chronology of English monarchs, those men and women who not only ruled, but also changed the course of history. It all begins with William the Conqueror, who in 1066 dethroned the last Anglo-Saxon king, Harold Godwinson, at the famous Battle of Hastings. But William of Normandy, in 1027, his rise to the throne was a brutal event. Despite being an illegitimate son, his bravery and crowning allowed him to take control of England, marking the beginning of the Norman era. William I is also known for having ordered the creation of the famous Domesday Book, a census that helped consolidate his hold on the lands of England. His reign was not without challenge, but it marked the transition from an Anglo-Saxon England to a feudal Norman England. But the history of English royalty doesn't end here. Following William's death was William II, known as William Rufus, who ruled from 1087 to 1100. William II, William's son, is remembered as an unpopular and despotic king, perhaps even murdered by his own men in a hunting accident. There is a speculation that an arrow in the chest during a hunt in the New Forest could have been a murder disguised as an accident. Although William II's reign was brief, his actions left a mark on the history of the English monarchy. William II's brother, Henry I, was the next to ascend the throne, born in 1068 in Yorkshire. Henry I was the first native-born English king. He ruled from 1100 to 1135, and although he began his reign with iron authority, his legacy was marked by the tragedy sinking of the White Ship in 1120, in which his only legitimate son died. This disaster left Henry I without an heir, led into a bitter dispute over the throne between his daughter, Matilda, and his nephew, Stephen of Blois. The famous civil war, known as the Anarchy, plunged the English royal family into a fratricidal struggle. After years of conflict, Henry II, Matilda's son, ascended the throne in 1154. Was as expensive as it is controversial. Married to Eleanor of Aquitaine, Henry II ruled a vast empire that included both England and parts of France. However, his reign was marked by the brutal death of Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was murdered by his own men, supposedly on the king's orders. This incident, along with his tumultuous relationships with his wife Eleanor and his children, made Henry II one of the most fascinating and complex monarchs in English history. His son, Richard I, known as Richard the Lionheart, ascended the throne in 1189. Richard I is famous for his participation in the Crusades, where he fought to recapture Jerusalem. Although his bravery in battle is undeniable, his lack of presence in England and his lack of concern for the internal affairs of his kingdom made him more of a legendary figure than a political one. In 1192, Richard was captured while returning to England, and the ransom was so expensive that it nearly bankrupted the kingdom. The next king, John I, better known as John Lackland, ruled from 1199 to 1216. John is remembered as one of the worst monarchs in English history, losing almost all of his English holdings in France and facing an internal rebellion from his own nobles. In 1215, after being pressured by his nobility, John signed Magna Carta, a document that limited royal power and established fundamental principles of liberty and justice. This historic moment laid the foundations for modern democracy. John's son, Henry III, ascended to the throne in 1216 at the age of just 9. His reign was long, but marked by conflicts with the barons and a growing weakness in his authority. It was during his reign that Simon de Montfort led a rebellion that resulted in the capture of Henry III and his son at the Battle of Lewes in 1264. Despite the difficulties, Henry III left a legacy in architecture, notably with the rebuilding of Westminster Abbey. Henry III was succeeded by his son, Edward I, known as Long Edward. Born in 1239, Edward I was a decisive and ambitious monarch During his reign, he achieved the unification of Wales and began the war with Scotland. His conquest of Scotland made him known as the Hammer of the Scots and left a profound mark on English history. His reign also saw the expulsion of the Jews from England in 1219, an act that generated controversy in its time. Edward II, son of Edward I, assumed the throne in 1307. His reign was marked by military weakness, and his favorites, Piers Gaveston and Hugh Despenser, who rapidly gained power, causing enmity among the barons. After losing the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, Edward II suffered political humiliation that led to his disposition in 1327 by his wife Isabella of France and her lover Roger Mortimer. After being forced to abdicate, Edward II was imprisoned and, according to legend, brutally murdered. Edward III, son of Edward II, ascended the throne in 1327. His 5-year reign, 1327 to 1377, was one of his most notable, as it marked the beginning of the 100 Years' War against France. He was also the king who consolidated the Order of the Garter and confronted the Black Death that decimated the population. Although his reign was successful, internal struggles over the succession to his throne, due to his multiple sons, gave rise to what would later be known as the Wars of the Rose. In 1377, Richard II, Edward III's grandson, ascended the throne at just 10 years old, entering the kingdom fraught with tension. His youth and lack of experience brought him into conflict with the barons, who desired greater power. During his reign, Richard aimed to consolidate control, but his authoritarian decisions and closeness to certain favorites created political strife. In 1399, Henry Bolingbroke, son of John of Gaunt and Richard's cousin, took advantage of the instability to rebel. In a coup, he deposed Richard II, exiled him, and ultimately caused him to die in the Tower of London in 1400, a grim fate for a deposed king. The reign of Henry IV, 1399–1413, marked the beginning of the Lancastrian dynasty. After he overthrew Richard II, Henry IV consolidated his power, but it was his son, Henry V, who truly made his mark on history. In 1430, Henry V ascended the throne, and in 1415, he led the epic victory at the Battle of Agincourt during the 100 Years' War against France. This victory cemented his reputation as one of the most accomplished and military successful monarchs of his time. Henry V also strengthened his relationship with France through a strategic alliance and marriage. After his death in 1422, his son Henry VI, who assumed the throne as a child, inherited a fragile kingdom. His youth and lack of leadership led to a period of internal turmoil, culminating in the devastating Wars of the Rose between the House of Lancaster and York. Finally, in 1485, Henry Tudor, a descendant of the House of Lancaster, achieved a decisive victory at the Battle of Bosworth, defeating Richard III and claiming the crown. He became Henry VII, the first monarch of the Tudor dynasty. But his rise was not only a military victory, but also a political one. With his marriage to Elizabeth of York, he united the two rival houses that had fought for years in the Wars of the Rose. This marriage restored peace to England and cemented the future of the Tudors. Their lineage lasted until 1603 with Elizabeth I, who, by refusing to marry, earned the title of the Virgin Queen, one of the most iconic figures in English history. If this video left you speechless, imagine what's coming next. Like if you enjoyed the trip, comment on what impressed you most. Subscribe so you don't miss any history of luxury and power, and share it with someone who dreams big. We don't just tell stories here, we live them with you. Thanks for being here, and remember, the best in the world is yet to be discovered. See you in the next video.